Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Yep, still doing pandemic projects. Still reaching out and thanking our local hometown heroes, the ones that are putting their lives on the line every day, trying to keep us safe and out of harm's way with the pandemic. Special shout out and thank you to our EMTs, our hospital wards, our emergency rooms, the COVID wards, the doctors, the nurses, the hospital administrators, the fire and police, and everybody who's involved in just trying to maintain some semblance of order during all of the pandemic. Thank you. And as I've noted before, if you're a frontline worker and you have a reel that you haven't been able to service in a while because of your commitment to your job and task at hand, then I'm willing to tune that reel up for you and make minor repairs on it at no cost to you. Simply contact me, let me know a little bit about what you do, and I'll get you that information in terms of how to get the reel to me. And that's going to stand through the end of January, and hopefully this vaccine will start to ease the load of everybody involved. So thank you again. Today we're going to work on the Penn SpinFisher. It's the 4500 SS. SS is the skirted spool, which means it goes over the rotor rather than inside the rotor. And this one is a nice reel, made in the USA. It's the last version of them. I guess this is Series 4. Series 5 began manufacture in China in around 2005. Doug from Maryland sent the reel in. I've been working on his reels, and I probably have one of these in my library. I'm not sure, but you know, everybody always likes to see these done anyway. So if it's redundant, you can go back to my library, see which one worked out better. I start by removing the external parts. That includes the spool. While I'm on the spool, this one's spooling evenly. I did get a question, is there a way to adjust the height of the spool? There really isn't. There's a single Teflon washer here. If that's missing, that may cause what I call coning, heavily spooled on the top and not lesser so on the bottom. Sometimes folks will double that up, but that's not an adjustment washer per se. All right, so we took the spool off. Just checking here. Some of these SpinFishers actually have the nut that goes through to remove the handle. This one does not. It's always good to check. It's probably the earlier version of this. I am noticing there's a little sand in that cup of the rotor there. That's the whole idea with the skirted spool. As it throws off the water, it keeps it out of the rotor cup there. All right, since we don't have a spool, that means that this handle comes off in a clockwise fashion. I lay the big body parts up top, and I'm going to be using a parts tray. It's nothing more than the bottom of a plastic container. In this case, I think that's ice melt container there, keeping with the season. And we have 4 side plate screws. And when I take these side plate screws out, I like to make sure that the screws are all the same length, so I lay them on my table here. Now, the SpinFisher design has changed over time. The first 2 editions actually had a spiral gear, and then they started going to what we'll call now the more traditional crosswind block and crosswind gear to drive that axle shaft up and down. And they've made some modifications to that in the last few editions. Okay, all 4 of those screws are the same length, so now I'm going to put them into my parts tray. And I do that for 2 reasons. One is to kind of keep them out of harm's way, and the second one is I go to reinstall. Well, if there's any parts left over, I know that I better go back and figure out where they came from. How do you do that? Well, you take pictures along the way. I'm taking pictures with the recorder here. Or you simply look at a schematic. Either one of them would suffice. Okay, the main gear is kind of flopping around here. There's 2 screws below. There's a bearing inside here. I'm going to flood that bearing right now. Let that sink in. I'm going to use Realex, which is an aftermarket fishing reel oil. And I recommend that as you're servicing your reels, you use fishing reel oil and grease. Yeah, you could use Penn. To me, it doesn't matter too much. I actually have the Penn greases and oils here. Not because I'm working on a Penn reel, but because that's a convenient oil and grease that has treated me well, so I kind of go with it. Guess I don't have that one out all the way. There's 2 screws that hold a flat bar. There we go, now we got that out. 2 screws go into my parts tray. Flat bar goes into my parts tray. That frees up the axle shaft now, so you can pull that axle shaft up. As you do, as you're pulling it out, make sure it comes out nice and easy and it's not stuck. If you find that there's resistance on here, it means that there's a bend in the axle shaft and it would have to be replaced. All right, that's out of the way. We should be able now to get that gear out of the way. Simply pull it off. We're going to have to clean that up. Take the crosswind block off. We're going to have to clean that up. That comes up and out. Take the crosswind block out, or take the crosswind gear out. That's the lower case. We have a bearing in the back, and then we're going to go up top, remove the pinion and the rotor. So before I go too far, I do have a protective glove on my hand. I use that to keep the old greases and oils and things off. I also use it as a tool from time to time. So I'm going to clean up the pieces that we just took off, get the old grease off of it. Most of the time, you can wipe it off. That's when I'm using a paper towel to do that. When you get accumulated grease like this, I go to a cotton swab just to get all that old grease out of there. It accumulates on quite a few places on this main gear because there's a lot going on with that main gear. You've got a block in the back here that's going to drive the small gear, is going to drive the crosswind gear. You got the main gear, which is going to drive the pinion gear for the rotor. And you got a lot to keep lubricated as this shaft goes into a bearing on both sides. And you want to check the teeth here. You want to make sure that they're clean and that you don't have dry grease in there. Most of the time, if the reel hasn't been serviced in a while, you don't find any kind of grease in there. It's usually all spooled around the back here as the centrifugal force has kind of thrown it into the cavity there. All right, we're clean with that. Let's go up top then. This is I believe it's a 13 millimeter, at least that's the one I pulled out. Check. This comes off in a traditional counterclockwise move. There is some sand in here, so I'm going to try and pull this away. And then I'm going to just see if I can't do that off my bench here. It's not because I'm doing anything fancy here. I just don't want to get the sand on my bench. Rather it fall on the floor. So it's not the guy doesn't pay attention to where his camera angle is. I do. Okay, that's cleaned up there. Clean up the inside. While we're at it, I like to use this time to put some penetrating oil on each junction of the bail assembly. You do not need to remove the bail wire. Penetrating oil generally will just loosen up anything that's stuck in there. This one's working nicely. Check underneath, make sure that you have the little trip lever protruding, and if you push in on that, you will find it fires. All right, I'm going to leave that outside. That's kind of a big body part. Let's come over to the business end of the top side here. We can remove the ratchet that's going to hold the anti-reverse dog. Notice the slot in the anti-reverse dog. There is a spring, an eccentric spring on this ratchet right here. That spring is going to go into that slot. Let's see if we can highlight it this way. Maybe you can see it better like that. But there is a spring there that's going to go into the slot of the anti-reverse dog. If you don't get that correct, it's going to fall out. Okay, there's 2 screws here. I'm going to try and take the bearing assembly off without taking that dog off. It's got a C-clip on it. You can certainly take the dog off. But if you can work around that, it's just one piece that's a little bit easier. So I've pulled the clip out of the way. I've left the screw there. We should be able to pull up on the assembly. And we don't have the clearance. So we're going to go ahead and pull this off completely. Don't force anything when you're doing this. This is simply an E-clip. You can see the E-clip. It rides in the groove. And you can remove that dog. And we can clean the rest of this case. So there's not much going on here. It's a pretty clean reel. If anything, it needs a little bit of lubrication to keep it going, but other than that, it's in good condition. So the noise it was making, Doug, I think I noticed when I was taking off the rotor that the rotor nut was not fully tightened. That's an easy problem because you don't have the nut tie-down screw that you have on some reels. So we'll tighten that up as part of the service here. Okay, flooding the back bearing with that oil. Going to take the bearing off of this one. Flood that as well. These are shielded bearings, they're not sealed bearings, as best I can tell, so that that grease should be able to work its way, or that oil should be able to work its way down. Now I'm cleaning out the grooves using my fingernail and a paper towel to get the old grease out. You can also use a hard bristle brush. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can use an old toothbrush if you like. Use a new toothbrush if you like. Okay, this goes back on. I like to put a little bit of grease on the inside where that inside race is going to travel. I'm using Penn Precision reel grease. I get questions frequently about that. That's the reel grease that I use. So we'll put a little bit where that bearing is going to go. We're going to get a lot where the pinion gear is going to intersect with the main gear. Just like that. Okay, now we can put our bearing back on. Reinsert that assembly up top here. I left that one part of the clip in, so let's make sure that we properly seat that. Swing this over. Since it's already in, I'm going to tighten that down. We can put the other side in. So if you have any questions, you can always pull these schematics, and the schematics are available at mysticparts.com, as are a lot of these as replacement parts if you find that you have a part that is broken when you open up your assembly. Next up then is the anti-reverse dog. And we have a little C-clip or E-clip. I guess they're E-clips that we found in that groove there. I can get it started. Sometimes you can push this in by hand, like I just did there. Sometimes they're a little bit stubborn. If you need an assist, you can grab something like a little needle nose pliers and kind of push it in from the back end. But in this case, that's doing fine. And we can take our anti-reverse collar or ratchet. I'm not sure what they want to call this. Find that spring. Remember what we were talking about, that spring there, because that spring is going to go in that little notch. And again, we can do you want to line it and then you want to swing it over. So that's properly set there. And then this is ready to just reinstall the rotor. We've already put the penetrating oil on, cleaned that up. So let's just go ahead and put the rotor nut on. And then we'll take that for a spin before we go any further. If you, for some reason, if you found yourself missing a step or misinstalling, it'll show right away when you hand turn this. I like to do this by hand as much as I can, the initial threading. That way you don't cross thread it. I'm going to tighten it down here. Make sure it's nice and secure. Give it a spin, and that's spinning very nicely. go ahead and make sure the bail's tripping, which it is. So we can come on down to the lower end of the reel then. I'm going to start by taking the gear that we cleaned. We want to get some grease onto the back of that. Want to get some grease into where the stud is. And this little guy works hard. It drives the... It intersects with the main gear in the back to get the power to drive. The front drives the crosswind block, which is holding the axle shaft. So you got to get grease all around this one. And go ahead and slip that in. Next up then, we can grab the crosswind block. The crosswind block, you want to get grease into that cavity in the back there. That's what the stud is going to ride through on. That can go on next. And sometimes you have to move that stud up top there. Sometimes you can get it right. But if you're working with this, as I just did here, keep the block low. That way when you go to install the axle shaft, you're going to clear the main gear. Speaking of the main gear, it's time to get the lube now. So we're going to grab some lube. We're going to go where the bearing is going to seat. We're going to get grease onto the teeth on the back, which is going to drive the crosswind block. We're going to get grease onto the teeth of the main gear. And there's the reason why I call main gear. It's moving everything, right? And get the grease up there so that it can intersect with your pinion gear up top. And we can just simply install. Once you install that, we've cleaned up the shaft on the axle. We're going to put a light coat of grease on that. Don't put a lot on, because when it goes through that pinion gear, the inside of the pinion gear, everything is going to scrape off because it's a very close tolerance. So just enough that it can stay lubricated. There's a flat spot here. That's where that flat bar is going to go. So bring that to the front as you go to install with the crosswind block. And this is how it should look. You should have it flat, where you can put the crosswind block in. And I use a little pin to align the holes. And those of you that know me know it's time for you to go get coffee, because me and these little screws are going to create an adventure here. I just never have any luck getting these two guys in. One of the things I was told, and it works occasionally, we'll see if it works today, put some grease onto the tip of a screwdriver to help you hold that as you get it started. Those of you that are keeping score, yes, I know that I have the screw in the case there. Now I have the screw out, and that little dab of grease seems to hold it enough. Almost. Let's try that again. All right. Looks like we par for the course. A little bit of effort. That's it done. Now you can spin your reel and make sure everything's working before you go any further. And see how the crosswind gear goes up and down. A little bit of grease onto the stud here that's going to hold the gear into the bearing. We've had this bearing oiled already. We're just going to simply put the case on now. That should just snap on. You shouldn't feel any resistance. Let's take our 4 screws to pull onto the case. All right, put that on. Now, Penn makes a rod and reel cleaner. I think I've introduced you to that before, but I've got a lot of oil on this reel, so I'll just give you a look at how that does. I like what I see. It's a cleaner and it's a wax all in one. As best I know, it doesn't damage any kind of decals or that, and it does. It was a nice job. This is a Penn reel, so you don't, just like the oils and greases, you can use that cleaner on other reels. Or it's not one of these things that doesn't work on a Shimano or a Daiwa or any others. It's just a nice cleaner, so we'll just take care of all that extra goop I got on here. That's another reason why you see me wearing that glove. So just a little squirt. It doesn't take much of this. A little squirt, paper towel, wipe it off. It's good on dried grease and fish scales and other things that tend to wind up on fishing reels. Does a nice job. So we'll clean up the case with that. Right, the only thing that's left then is that drag stack. And interestingly enough, so traveling down memory lane, this is the first drag stack I ever replaced. So there you go. I had one of these reels, and I got a terrible drag performance. I didn't even know you could come up top here and fix those drags. And an old fella that runs a bait and tackle shop certainly knew how to do it, showed me, and I thank him for that. So here's your drag stack. It's a whole bunch of drag washers. This one has been replaced before, I can see that, and it's in good condition. You have a set of 3 drag washers. They're HT100s, 2 round ones and a keyed one in the middle here, or an octagonal one in the middle. These are HT100s. You do not need to grease those. If you like to grease them, use something like a Cal's Universal Drag Grease. Never assume, right? I don't know the history of this reel. I don't know when Doug had it serviced last, so don't assume that the drag washers are good just because you don't see dirt or anything. Go ahead and take the time. It would take us a minute and a half to go look at this and make sure that those drag washers were in good condition. And then with this big ring, just get one side in, hold it down. It will spring. It's a spring clip. And just make sure it's setting into the grooves. The only purpose of that clip is a retaining ring. It is not doing anything else. So some folks lose that thing and think that they can't take the reel fishing. Well, you sure can. Just remember when you take your spool off that there's a chance that drag stack may go flying. So, all right, tighten that down. Make sure that we've got it set properly. We do, and then I like to back that off so that I don't keep pressure on those drag washers while it's not fishing. All right, one more thing we'll do, put the handle in, give it a spin. Very nice. And we'll test our bail that we did. There you go. Very nice. There's a little slot here for the folding handle. Doesn't hurt to put some oil in that as well. So that's it. So if you're a first responder or one of our emergency personnel out there and you have a reel that you would like service like this, well, just contact me on the business card that follows. If you like this video, please subscribe, and if you do subscribe, please hit notifications so that you can see the posts that I do. I do post frequently. If you have a question, please leave it in the comments. The question does not need to be about this particular reel. It can be about anything. Maybe you're working on a reel and you're stuck, just like we talked about earlier on in the video about that shim washer and even spooling on a line. So leave that in the comments section. And finally, if you have a reel like Doug and it needs its annual service and you don't want to do it yourself, then contact me and I'll be able to provide you with that information regarding how to send those reels to me. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.